Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. So grateful to share some time with author Melody Farrell to celebrate the upcoming release of her new book, The Forest Before the Field, A Guide for Pioneers. Melody is the founder of Pioneer Circle and director of Circle A Summit, the ministries focused on resourcing young teens to live well through the changing of an age. She's also a wife, a mother, a musician, a podcaster, entrepreneur, speaker, and runner, serves on leadership teams of several ministries here in Tampa, including Element Church and Grow Into You Foundation, but also a good friend. And so it's awesome, Melody, to have you here and to celebrate The Forest Before the Field. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. So excited to be a part of this community of the podcast. So thank you for squeezing me in among all of the amazing people that you have on the podcast.
Yeah, it's become really fun.
Yeah.
I have the best job in the world because I get to hang out with so many people who are really, really so thoughtful right now about our moment, and from their particular place, bringing excellent thought or incredibly sacrificial work in the space of good, or a lot of people contributing art and beauty to the world. And all of it, we always say the life and beauty of the gospel with the world. That's our aim. And this is pretty special because we've done book releases and book launches before on the
Yep.
other side, but this is your book and your new book. And I want to talk about a few different things today. I want to talk about the summit side and some of the coaching platform side. We're going to get into that before we celebrate the book. But something caught me, and when I was prepping for this, and thanks for sending me a copy of the book ahead of time. It's a guide for pioneers, and you say that your aim is to resource teens who are living at the change of an age. And if you're okay, I want to dive straight into that so that we have time to talk about all of those different spaces. But I think that may have struck some other people too. Like, what do you mean? Help unpack that a little bit, that you want to resource teens for the very changing of an age.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the teens, the next rising generation right now, is living in such a crucial, interesting, somewhat scary, somewhat beautiful moment. Pope Francis, a few years ago, was addressing the church, and he said, "We're not living through an era of change, but through the change of an era."
Mm.
And I think that's true for the church. That's true for culture at large. And it's very specifically true for our youth right now. And it's true not only in their own lives as they are living through the change of an age from being a child to being an adult in this space of adolescence, but also true in the culture we are living in, and the world that they are growing into is going to be a different age than the world we grew up in. And so to give them resource to live well in that new world that we can't necessarily fully even imagine or know the questions that they're going to be facing or the work that they're going to be doing in that world, but to resource them with ancient wisdom, with truth and beauty and goodness so that they can live well through that change. That's my aim.
Yeah. Well, I'm really inspired by it, and I'm really grateful for your thoughtfulness about that. I have kids, four of them, and one of the things Cammie and I think about all the time is when you look at what you can equip and give kids that's going to travel with them. I can give them my best thinking from the moment, but there are timeless things that we can pass down. But sometimes it's like, well, how do I gather all that together? And where do I start to provide some sort of if I needed to give a quick resource or something as they head out into that changing of an age, how do I do that? It seems you've done that. You've done a lot of hard work to curate some of that best ancient wisdom and put it in language that's really helpful and accessible, and create something that you can give to a particular person that you're imagining. And before I ask you about that person, what does it feel like? I just imagine somebody really wise one time said, if you're ever in a circumstance, think about what that feels like to a child in that
Mm.
moment. Even a busy restaurant and how disruptive. And you think we're at the changing of an age. the very shifting of one era to the next. What do you think the kids of our moment are feeling that maybe they don't even have language for?
Mm. I think that's a really good point is that they don't have language for it. And that's one of the things that I hope to do with my work and with this book is to give them language to express what they're experiencing. And I work with a lot of kids right now. I think I think they're experiencing fear mostly.
Sure.
I think they're experiencing a world that is telling them that they need to be afraid. They need to be afraid of what's coming. They need to be afraid of who they are. They need to be afraid of the downfall of the institutions that their parents have grown up, respecting. So much fear, so many things that these kids need to be afraid of. And I don't necessarily know that they're aware of that fear, but it is seeping into them deeply. And I'm concerned. I think our kids are in trouble. And I think that's all of our responsibility to engage them where they are, to not get so bogged down with our own troubles and our own fears and our own lives that we forget this rising generation is in trouble and they need truth, they need hope, they need encouragement, they need community. Um, and so that's what we're working to do.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. The feeling of fear and that sense of alarm,
Yep.
and we don't have language for it all the
Yep.
time. We don't know that it's fear that we're feeling, but we're nervous, we're anxious. You look at the data and it's
Yeah.
saying that all the time. And I think your point is well made that as parents, we're trying to make it
Right.
and get through our things. And quietly in our own homes, our kids are shouldering the load of a world that the messaging is it's very curated and very specific to them is the climate is going to kill you.
Yep.
The whole COVID's going to kill you. This is going to kill you. That's going to kill you. You're going to miss this. Yeah. How are you going to make it? That's the messaging that they're constantly feeling. And it's being absorbed. Like you said, we're porous. It's being soaked into us pretty steadily,
Yep.
maybe more than ever before because of technology.
Yeah.
So when you think that's overwhelming to think of, okay, young people are this huge population that are experiencing this. And you wrote to a person. You said, I want to put a resource. Who did you imagine handing this to?
Yeah, I think this book is, I mean, I wrote this book for my kids, to be honest. I'm a mom. I've got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. And first and foremost, I wrote it to hand it to them because I want them to have a resource like this. I want them to have a lot of resources like this. This is a drop in the bucket. But I think it's a bucket that really matters. Um, so yeah, I wrote it to that middle school, early high school age, that adolescent age where they really are changing from their childhood selves into what will become their adulthood selves. And in that moment, how can they be grounded in truth and beauty and goodness? How can they be encouraged? How can they learn how to deal with this fear in a different way than the world is teaching them to deal with this fear? Because what they're being taught is to numb that fear right away. Just turn on that Netflix, just turn on this music, just be, just put it to the back of your mind because you can't fix it. And so they're being taught either to numb or just to buy into a whole producer consumer culture where they're going to be valued by what they produce. And so just lay it all out on the floor and work till you die because that's the only way you're going to get through this. And so there's got to be a better way than numbing or working till we die. And so I wrote this book for my kids and for these kids in this space of adolescence to say, hey, we're with you and there's a different way to handle what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it the way that you wrote the book too, because it feels like that. I know that my dad gave me a book when I was 14 years old, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And so I hear that all the time, by the way, from authors, from people who have gone on to do incredible things in their own life. And I say, where did that come from? And so many of them go right back to, hey, well, my parent gave me a
Mhm.
book, or a friend or a mentor handed me a book, and it's in this space. So if you're a parent, don't underestimate how powerful it is to put the right resource in front of our kids in that really wet cement space of adolescence, beautiful things can happen. And we'll pull on that thread. You said good, true, and beautiful things. They all are being formed right there.
Mhm.
Writing right to that wet cement space, how did that inform the way that you wrote this book? Because I also know I've been handed books that I cracked them open and I was lost. Part of that was a lot of that was me, but some of that was the writing. And you did a particular thing in kind of bringing together a lot of different parts to make this book accessible. Talk a little bit about how you wrote to that person to build a bridge and to make it accessible in a day where we're used to maybe accessing information in a different way.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you had an experience with your dad handing you a book. I had a very similar experience with my dad as an adolescent, but as a younger child, my dad handed me a book, and it was The Horse and His Boy. It was a C.S. Lewis book. And I think that story has an incredible capacity to teach, to inspire, to enchant us in a way that other writing doesn't do. And so I wanted this book to be filled with stories and be filled with the invitation to explore more stories because I feel like honestly that's what these kids need in order to have language for what they're experiencing, in order to have some sort of orientation of like where am I in this world? Who am I in this world? What do I even feel? We can write that in prose, but I don't think it's necessarily going to connect. What will connect is when they see a character in a story and they're like, that's how I feel. That's where I am. So this book is filled with little parables. There's very short stories to kind of get us into some topics to discuss. And then throughout the discussion, there's lots of references to the great stories because I feel like honestly, those are the places where these kids are really going to come back to the foundations of wisdom and truth and goodness and beauty and those things.
Yeah. No, it did that. I love how you constructed the book and how you were super thoughtful about that. I gave it to one of my daughters and said, "Hey, just read this, and I want to know your feedback." And when I asked her about her feedback, she said, "Dad, I love the stories." And they brought her in through characters that she could, and that's how we learn. That's how we access these things. We start to imagine ourselves traveling this similar landscape and we start to have an imagination and language for moving through this forest. And there's a Dante thing, right? Midway through the journey of life, I found myself in a dark wood and here I am. And so this pattern repeats itself
Mhm.
over and over and over in our lives. But at adolescence, it seems you've come right to that person about to head into those woods and with story invited them to say, you're not alone. These questions have been asked before, these things have been explored before, and let me show you these things. So they're going to read that, but as a mom and as an author, did you imagine them doing that in conversation with parents or with other friends, or there seemed to be a conversation developing between you and the reader for sure, but did you hope that that would how did you hope that that would spill into the home?
Absolutely. I think the way that it spills into the home and into whatever communities these kids are a part of is essential. I think they can learn a little bit from the stories and maybe a couple things from the other writing, but it's really going to be the conversation and the embodied practices of these things that they're living out in their lives. So we've called it a guide for pioneers. And I love this idea of pioneer because I do think our teens, our middle school, high school kids, really, I really think it's a whole generation of pioneers. Like we said, they're going right through the change of an age, and they're all going to be pioneering in different spaces that they're living. So when we think of this idea of pioneers, I'm picturing the Oregon Trail of these wagons cutting through the wilderness in a community, in a group, right? So every night when they would finish their travels, these wagons would circle up in a safe environment where they could rest, where they could be together, where they could plan their next day, where they could find safety and community. And that's really what I want our kids to experience. They are pioneers. They are foraging a way through the wilderness, but they're not alone. They're
Mm.
not doing it alone. Our generation, we're right there with them. And they, as a generation, can begin to build community together, build hope and stories together so that they can lead on. So, absolutely, I hope that this is a tool really for educators, for parents, for camp leaders, for all different sorts of people who are building communities among our youth to say, here's some stories we can discuss together. And there's even a discussion guide in the book so that there's an easy way to kind of start those conversations. And there's so many different pieces in each chapter. We've got poetry, we've got quotes from the greats, we've got stories, we've got little teachings. So many different tiny pieces that we can pick up and have conversations with our kids about. So my hope and my prayer is that this is just an essential resource that every parent can hand their kid, that every teacher can hand their student, to pick up those conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the picture of obviously the Oregon Trail and doing that together. I think don't underestimate if you're listening to this conversation. And most parents, I think intuitively we know this. And I think sometimes we go back and we go, yeah, but every generation has gone through this. I
Mhm.
want to underscore what you said from the Pope who said it. This is different.
Yep.
This moment is different. And these kids are leading a pioneering venture that has never been undertaken. And the questions on the table right now are, what does it mean to be human? Will we inhabit this planet?
Mhm.
Is there a more helpful way to live in a meta, some blend of virtual and actual reality? Like these are the things that these kids are going to navigate. Medical ethics,
Yep.
currency, economics, all of these things are making these huge leaps right now. And it's going to be our teens who are the ones at the table drawing from something. And so I love that you have that imagery that they are the ones leading. We're with them, but they are leading into this. And I think it's our responsibility to circle up
Yep.
and say, and as parents to say, hey, let's talk. And you've included virtue in here. I've heard you reference the transcendentals, good and true and beautiful. What were some of the things that you said, we can't put everything in an essential guide, but how did you come to a list of things that you said, if we're going to sit around and we're going to equip and resource with just a guide that can set you up for what you're engaged in, whether we like it or not, or whether, we recognize it or not, that's what they're engaged in. How did you kind of construct that scaffolding to say, these are the things I think we've got to have virtue in that conversation. We've got to come back to these transcendentals. How did you do that?
Yeah. I think several ways. I think the biggest way is that I'm looking at these kids, my kids, their friends, and I'm seeing the false stories that they're being told um, in their worlds, the false stories about their worth, about how the horizon is essentially meaningless and there's not a lot of hope left in the world. The false stories about how there is no enchanted reality, that, we're just the humans living on this ball of earth that's dying. All these false stories. So I kind of took those stories and instead told the true story for each of those spaces. So that's how we get to stories of stewardship, stories of enchantment, stories of virtue, so that we're not only speaking truth, we're directly saying, "Hey, you've been told a story that's not true.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the true one."
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I love that it touches our bodies, our identities, stewardship. How do we relate to the earth? Like these are the things that are the messages of our moment where kids are going, I'm being told this is the story and this is therefore what I should think about this, but something of that doesn't seem to ring true.
Yep.
But there's this vacant space and you're coming in and saying, no, there are answers and they're not, we don't have to make them up. They've
Right.
been there the whole time. And so you're uncovering them. What do you think some of the greatest challenges, just going back, we'll come back to the book, but as a mom and somebody working in this space with young people, what are some of the things that you're hearing over and over that are kind of the top of mind concerns facing the kids?
I mean, I think everyone's top of mind concern is mental health. Mental health issues are, I mean, everybody's got them or knows someone that's really struggling with them. And all the data that's coming out is showing us it's going to be more and more and more of a problem. And it's certainly a problem in our generation as well. So I think all of the mental health pieces are huge concerns, and they are afraid. Like they are being told, you are probably going to be depressed. You are probably going to be anxious. You are going to face all of these problems. So that's a huge piece. I think loneliness is always a huge piece that these kids are facing. But in this particular moment, with all of the AI conversations, all of the social media struggles that we're having as a society, these kids are only getting more and more lonely and isolated. So I think that is another huge, huge problem. Um, and then just the commodification of the world, and these kids are being told you're only worth what you can produce.
Mm.
So produce. You've got to figure out, by the time you're 10 years old, you better figure out what you're going to do in the world, what school you're going to go to, what your whole life is going to look like. Because if you aren't excellent, if you aren't at the top of your game, you're going to be nothing.
Yeah.
And they're facing that so young and so intensely. It's very heartbreaking.
Ah. I've had so many conversations with leaders in higher education, people who are really being innovative and thoughtful about just the college education, university life,
Mhm.
human formation, 18 to 30, all of those conversations. And there's a theme coming out where people are saying this instinct that we had to say, we need you to have dual enrollment, 48 AP
Mhm.
credits. You need to graduate college before high school because you got to get in line first. And if you don't have all of that done, you're behind.
Yep.
When you graduate, if you don't have an AA, you're behind. And you have to be dual enrolled. You have to be a college student while you're a high school student. That message and that pressure is so intense right now.
Yep.
And I'm hearing from people in the leading universities who are saying that's actually completely unhelpful to actually education
Mhm.
because some things just take time. And some things are only knowable because you mature and you see them from away and then you see them again and you get a third or a fourth look. And if we compress that time and say you need all of that look just so that you can pass the online test and move to the next marker, it's just destroying formation and what it is to actually become a flourishing person who can critically think. So everybody's feeling it,
Yep.
right? But I think the kids are experiencing the pressure to participate in that. And it's so, I mean, you talk about loneliness
Yep.
and mental health, and then we go, why is that the case? Well, look at the burden we're putting on them
Yep.
and the pressure to say you've got to have this done today or you're behind.
Yep. It's so intense. I mean, I see it with my kids every day. And there's a chapter in the book about wholeness, which is essentially saying like we are biological, psychological, social, and spiritual persons. And so all of those pieces have to grow alongside each other. And if we're giving our whole selves to just be academically excellent, like what cost? What cost does that come with? And so, I think that you're absolutely right. These kids are being told you've essentially got to graduate college before you even graduate high school. And it's crushing them. It's absolutely crushing them. So, a conversation about wholeness, not to say we're not going to pursue excellence. We are absolutely going to pursue excellence. We are absolutely encouraging our pioneers to pioneer, to be all that God created them to be, and to pursue excellence in every space of their lives, but to do it with wisdom and to do it with intention and to do it with balance. So important. And it's not what they're being taught.
Yeah. It's why I love the work that you're doing. It's why I respect you and as a leader and an author, but also the book, The Forest Before the Field. As a parent, I will just say this is for that entering adolescence, that young high school age. I'm with you. Like, if this could be an essential read and a starting point for
Yep.
the conversation, this will be a launch pad into other conversations and into other things, but it's a way in. And as parents and educators, leaders in churches, like every tool that we can possibly have at our disposal right now is so essential to try to get at this and to help uncover. I think one of the things that you're provoking in me right now is just the seriousness for us as adults to, I mean, I'm going to quote Taylor Swift, but to calm down.
Mm.
Like, part of it is for us to ratchet back the craziness that we've been caught up in,
Yep.
to say, I want my kid to have, a master's degree from Notre Dame, when they're 21.
Yep.
Like, we have to calm down and say, what I want is for my kids to flourish.
Yep.
And I would love for them to know what grass feels like. I would love for them to be able to have a poem or two that they can draw from when they're lonely or discouraged or afraid. I would love for them to know how to pray. I would love for them to know what food tastes like, right?
Absolutely.
That's what it is to be a human person.
Yep.
And so that's my sidebar
I love it. It's
comment. But
beautiful.
you are super wise in saying, I'm going to release this resource, but you've done this long enough, and your story has a lot of layers of human formation, coaching, mentoring, discipleship. All of that is in your DNA. And one of the things that I really appreciated is that you're not releasing this resource and saying, hey, good luck, as parents, because we're kind of in at the edge of this moment. You've been really thoughtful and have spent over a year building out an ecosystem to support the conversations that I think are going to come from this book. So, two things: talk a little bit about that ecosystem, but maybe before you talk about the ecosystem that you're kind of helping to create, how did your story inform that? Because I think you made some deliberate choices to slow down even the publishing of the book in order to pair it with an embodied, supportive community so that it could actually be helpful. Where did that instinct come from?
Yeah. Well, I do have a bit of a story. I really grew up in an embodied supportive community. My parents started a camp for kids. We ran it as a family for 40 years. So they ran it several years before I was even around. And it was my dad's dream, really, to do this work that I'm talking about doing, to resource kids at that time, to live well. And so he taught seminars all over the world, but the thing that was most dear to his heart and that he knew was most impactful was this camp experience that he created. So it was called Circle A Ranch, and it was in Michigan for a lot of years. Then it traveled around for a while. But we got to bring kids in for 2 weeks at a time and just really embody each of these pieces that he was teaching in a way that, like, they left transformed. It was a very transformative experience. And I got to be the beneficiary of not only experiencing that, but just of seeing decades of these kids coming in and their lives being transformed, mostly by the power of story and community and truth telling that was just seeped in love.
Yeah.
My dad loved these kids. Our leadership team loved these kids. The A of Circle A stands for God's agape love. And Dad always said it was the circle of God's love that included everyone in. So the world drew a circle that left me out. God drew a circle of love that included me in.
Hmm.
And so to be able to see these kids and to be one of these kids who was drawn into that circle, who was loved through the power of story, through the power of truth, through the power of community. When my dad passed away a few years ago, I needed to take some time to grieve him and to pray and seek the Lord about what my calling was as far as continuing his work on in the world, because I didn't want to just pick it up because that was the right thing to do. I needed to know if it was my calling as well. But the more that I've prayed and the more that I've worked with my own kids and the kids in my space, the more I do feel absolutely that that is such essential work. It is maybe the work that matters most in our world right now. So we have continued that. So we have built out an ecosystem that kind of culminates in an embodied experience. But we're starting just with social media. So we've built a social media platform, and that's basically a place where kids and parents and leaders can go to kind of work on getting some of this language that we're talking about, so that we can have words to express what we're feeling, what we're going through, what we're learning. And then also just to give resource, to give wisdom, to give inspiration and beauty. So all of that is available on our social media. Then we built a coaching platform. And it's called the Pioneer Circle. So it's this space for pioneers, basically families. It's built for 8 to 18-year-olds, but that middle school, young high school age is kind of the sweet spot where families can join in. We've got monthly coaching calls. We've got videos that go out from multiple leaders to our kids and to the families each week. We've got an app where they can kind of track their life affirmations and the goals that they're working towards. So just building this community of resource, of leaders, of encouragement and inspiration to where when these kids come together on our coaching calls every month, they now have a community of people who are learning the same language, who are traveling in the same direction. And then we've got our Circle A Summit, which it's a family camp format, so a little bit different than what my dad did, but really cool because families can come together to be a part of an embodied experience where we're going to put down all of the noise and chaos that we're inundated in our lives. And we're going to come together in an enchanted space. We're going to be outside. We're going to worship. We're going to play. We're going to embody some of these ideas of stewardship and virtue and enchantment so that we can learn together, grow together, and be even more in community with each other. So that's kind of the ecosystem that we've built, and it's built out of what I experienced my family doing in the world. And we've got an amazing group of families who have come on board to be a part of that because they experienced it at Circle A as well. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. It's amazing how much thought. That's what I loved. Kind of getting to know this and seeing you be really thoughtful about how you were going to approach this work. The first thing I appreciate is the legacy from your dad and the fact that you took that so seriously to say, I'm not just going to default assume that that's my job or my
Mhm.
responsibility or my calling, but that you spent some time with that and came back to it, and maybe picked it up, put it down, picked it up, put it down. But then there was a moment where you said, no, this is something that God is calling me into. And again, I just want to underscore and say thank you, because if we think about the number of kids in America, just our city, just the Southeast, whatever, right? The number of kids who are crashing onto the beach. I think I heard Mike Sherrard said this, or somebody at Mike Sherrard from Apologetics Inc. Their event said, if you think about Normandy
Mhm.
and everybody who was coming onto the beach, it was bad intel that led to that incredibly devastating loss of life. That they had not correctly calculated what it was going to take, and the depth and all. You
Yeah.
hear that story and go, oh. And I think what you're trying to do is say, let's not make that mistake with our kids,
Yep.
and let's get the right thinking and the right support and the right ecosystem as they land and they start to put legs and feet and start to head into that. So I love that it starts with social media. My opinion, like, it is real, right?
Yep.
These are they're the streets we live on.
Yep.
And so we might as well put some flowers in them because we're walking them all the time. So they
Right.
might as well be beautiful and good and true. So you start with that and just giving a resource. Anybody can connect with that. How can somebody connect on social media? Where do they find you?
Easiest place is Pioneer Circle. So at Pioneer Circle, Instagram, Pioneer Circle on Facebook.
Okay.
You'll find everything from there.
Okay. And that's targeted parents, kids,
Yep.
just the whole family ecosystem.
Yep.
That can be a resource that a parent can say, I'm going to follow it. Kids are going to follow it. That's where we start. Next, book is coming out in April 18th
That's the
is
day.
release date. Yep. Release date. Can people pre-order, or is that a thing? Or you
Nope. We're
just,
just going to launch it on the 18th and go from there.
okay, so April 18th, The Forest Before the Field, A Guide for Pioneers. That's when the book comes out. And so everybody get a copy of the book. And here's what I'm going to ask is just share it with people. If you're a parent of a teen, early teen, somebody coming ashore into those preteen years, that's who this is written to, and not just to your kids, but to you as parents. And so I'd say April 18th, get it, take a look at it before, and then you think about how to curate that conversation. But start with social media. April 18th, the book comes out. And then if somebody wants to participate and get in touch with you, and I think what I love about that coaching relationship is that it doesn't matter where you live necessarily.
Yep.
You can have a tribe of people who are rowing in the same direction. And that's pretty powerful for young people to have that opportunity. If somebody's interested, where do they go to connect with you about that?
You can go to pioneercircle.org. That's going to have all the connections. So that's going to have connections to the Circle A Summit, to the coaching platform. All the pieces are there. So
Camp
pioneercircle.org.
pioneercircle.org
Mm-hmm.
at Pioneer Circle.
Yep.
And where camp is once a year
Once a year in June.
in
Yep.
June. Is it still possible to register for it, or is this year
There
past?
are a few spaces left, so we could fit a couple more families. So we'd love to have it packed out.
Yeah. I love that you put a limit on it
Yeah.
too. I think that's so cool. Kyle Washut from a college that he was talking about intentionally small
Hmm.
opportunities. And he was saying, we have to be honest that in order to provide a certain level of experience and formation and support, you can only do it at a certain number.
Yep.
And I think that's super wise. So there is a limit, but this summer there's a few spaces left.
Yes, sir.
For the parent who is listening to this and going, okay, great. I can't wait for the book to come out. I'm going to follow this. I'm going to do this. I know some people I'm going to share this with so I don't feel alone. So, first, thank you for that. But as you think about that parent and your own experience with your kids and the friends that your kids have, what are a couple lessons learned that you might give parents? Because I know we always stand on the shoulder of our parents, and I know attempts that my parents made at that age that didn't go well, and they were well intentioned. They were right. I learned later in life that they had my best in mind, and they were right, but the approach wasn't done well. You're really good at this in building the bridge between the teen, the preteen, and the parent, and making that connection happen. Just some advice for us as parents, just from your view, working so many years with young people, what are some things to maybe be thoughtful of and slow about, maybe some mistakes that we can try to avoid that you've seen happen before?
Yeah, these are good questions. I think my answer might be not everybody's favorite answer, but I feel like it's probably the true answer. I think that our kids need to see us learning and growing and wrestling and being impacted by truth and beauty and goodness.
Mm.
And when they see it for real, they want to experience it. So, I can remember books that my mom gave me and told me, I'll pay $100 if you read this book. And I don't. I did not. I probably read it to get the money, but
Sure.
I don't remember the book, right? But I remember the ones my dad said, like, this changed something in me, and
Mm.
I want you to experience that. And I remember that book. I remember sitting on an airplane reading a book and knowing I wouldn't be the same after that book. And not necessarily even because of the words that were in that book, but because I knew, wow, this changed my dad. And
Mm.
he is awesome. And he learned something from this and it made him a better person. And I want to be like him.
Mm.
And so I think, to be honest, the most impactful thing we can do with our kids is to grow and to be enchanted and to be inspired and to latch on to hope and to witness and celebrate beauty. And when we do those things, our kids are going to want to do it too. Not that I'm saying, parents, you have to read my book and be so inspired. It might not be my book. Maybe it's the Chronicles of Narnia. But I think that when they see changes in us, they want to experience that too.
Yeah. I love that, first of all, because it's convicting because I've done the $100 thing. And because there's books that you're just like, please, please, please,
Yep.
how can I do this?
Yep.
Money's not the best incentive. I
Yeah.
love the story that you're telling that, like, if this is the book that shaped this person,
Yep.
what is it? I'm curious. What a better way in. So I love that. And just that if I love chocolate, that's why I'm sharing it because I love it.
Yep.
And so I think it is a good invitation for us to read the book. I read the book and you sent it my way. I read it. And what I found was, first of all, your storytelling is so wonderful that I read it and was just thankful because it helped refresh and irrigate that part of my brain.
Hmm.
And I was like, thank you for just getting me back to story and to the difficult and challenging task of writing well, and, not writing above or below, but just right in there.
Hmm.
So I think it's a great idea for parents to read it. And then we can sit down with our kids and say, hey, I learned something from this.
Yep.
And I picked this up because I thought it was interesting and I found something. And would you take a look at it? So I
Yep.
love that. Love that idea. Um, for young people who are hitting this beach and they're ready to pioneer, if you could say the one essential thing that a parent can do to run alongside and be a cheerleader and a champion for young people who are making this difficult climb. In your experience, what actually counts and matters the most to young people?
Mm.
And
I
I know that's different.
Yeah, it may be different for different kids, but I think that essentially, I think it boils down to the truth of hope that is alive in us. Whatever direction these kids are running in, if we are holding the hope that there is good and beauty and truth at the end of the story, if we are holding the hope of redemption, if we are holding the hope of your life matters and you are in this world to do something good and beautiful, and I know that the end of this story is beautiful. Like if we are in a place of confidence and hope, I think that's the best gift that we can give our kids. And there's all so much more wisdom that they need than that. But I think if it can start with that, then they're open to receiving that wisdom, because hope is precious.
Yeah. I love that. That even just the idea that this piece will resolve.
Yep.
You know, you're in a movie, you're in the tough part, and if you're watching a movie with somebody and you've seen it before and they're holding on to that suspenseful or difficult part, that embodied feeling of I know this resolves
Yep.
and we're going to get through this. There's something that's felt by the other person, I think, when you take that posture of hope. So I love that. Well, The Forest Before the Field, A Guide for Pioneers, wonderful book. And even just again, I appreciate the size of the book, the way that you put it together in a way to make it accessible and to make it something that can be helpful and travel with us. So, congratulations, well done. At Pioneer Circle, that is the Instagram. Go connect there. April 18th, the book comes out. Give us the website one more time if you want information about the camp, because I know that's coming up.
Yep. It's pioneercircle.org.
Pioneercircle.org. Melody, thank you so much for your work, for your life, for saying yes to that calling and vocation. And I would just ask everybody, in addition to getting the book, and just cheer on and participate, but pray for Melody and her family as this all launches. It's a courageous thing to step up and to say, I'm going to lean into this. So just know that our community will be cheering you on and with you and for you. So congratulations on the book. Thanks for sharing time.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all of your work in the world as well.
Yeah.
Love
Here
it.
we go. Cheers.